Thank God, this incredible HFY masterpiece found you today. Witness the legend starting now. The galactic communion of enlightened species had in its infinite wisdom and approximately 12,000 years of recorded history developed what it considered music, the pinnacle of educational philosophy. This wasn't your garden variety schooling system cobbled together by primitive civilization still figuring out that hitting children with sticks was counterproductive. No, this was refined. This was evolved. This was the kind of educational framework that made philosophers weep and bureaucrats achieve something disturbingly close to orgasm. The system operated on a principle so elegant it was taught in first cycle academies across 600 settled worlds. Segregation music by capability, not the crude barbaric kind that primitives practice based on melanin, content or economic status, mind you. The communion had evolved past such nonsense music. Roughly around the same time they discovered faster than light travel. No, this was segregation music. By biological destiny. Warriors trained with warriors, scholars bred scholars, artisans molded artisans. The system was perfect, tested across music millennia. And absolutely nobody had ever thought to question whether biology was quite as destiny-shaped as they'd assumed. Enter humanity. Stage left, tripping over its own diplomatic music credentials. The human species had been admitted to the communion approximately music 14 standard cycles ago, which in human time translated to about 9 years, which in practical terms meant that music most of the galaxy still thought of Earth as that aggressive little marble with the nuclear music, age aesthetic and concerning amount of weapons pointed at itself. The admission had been controversial. Several council members had argued that any species still working through its pointing music missiles at our own population centers phase probably needed a few more centuries in the cosmic waiting room. But humanity music had faster than light capability, had discovered the communion relay network and GT music and GT and most importantly had refused to leave the metaphorical reception area until someone filed their paperwork. Persistence, it turned out, was its own kind of qualification. What nobody had quite expected was that humans would want to teach. The communion had educators, naturally. The scholarly of Megran Prime with their 4 brains and philosophical traditions, dating back 6,000 years. The wisdom singers of Teller, who could hold 17 complex theorems in harmonic memory simultaneously. The archive minds of Sector 7, who were literally crystallized music, information given ambulatory form. These were music educators. These were beings who had dedicated their entire evolutionary path to the transfer of knowledge. Humans were enthusiastic primates who'd figured out agriculture roughly 10 minutes ago on the cosmic time scale. Music and still thought fighting each other over imaginary lines was a valid recreational activity. And yet, there was Professor Vin Hara, standing in classroom 7 beta of the Communion Educational Complex on Station Meridian, and GT music, and GT teaching intermediate xenobiology to a collection of species that could barely agree on what constituted alive versus technically music, alive versus crystalline consciousness with attitude. Problems. The classroom itself was a marvel. Music. Of inclusive design. Which was bureaucratic speak for. We tried to make it work for everyone. And succeeded in making it comfortable. For absolutely nobody. Gravity generators created microzones. Music accommodating species from 0.4 G to 2.8 G environments. Atmosphere mixers pumped carefully. Calibrated music blends into individual breathing zones. The desks were adjustable across 47 different body configurations. The result was a space that looked like someone had thrown furniture music into a physics simulator and let chaos take the wheel. Ven stood at the front. Human standard music, gravity beneath her boots, pointing at a holographic projection of something with too many organs and not enough sense to keep them music. Internal. She was average height for her species, which meant music she was a lanky giant to the Fornaxian student in the front row, and adorably bite-sized to the Caldraxian hulking in the back. Her hair was pulled into something that had started the day as a professional bun and had slowly evolved into what could charitably be called structural chaos. Her clothing was music standard, communion educator wear, adaptive fabric that shifted colors based on emotional state, which meant she'd spent most of her tenure here broadcasting various shades of "Are you kidding me right now" blue. So, she said, her voice carrying that particular music tone of someone who'd explained this concept 6 times already and was preparing for lucky number 7. Who can tell me why the Vrixian circulatory system has 3 redundant hearts despite originating on a planet with relatively stable gravity? Music. A flutter of appendages. The Menfarian student in the 3rd row. All crystalline elegance and refracted. Music light. Chimed in with a sound like wind through glass. The translation matrix embedded in everyone's auditory centers converted it to aggressive evolutionary pressures from predator species. Close, Ven said, pulling up another diagram. But remember, we're not just talking music about predators. We're talking about a species that decided the best response to having predators was to become more predatory than the predators. The Vrixians didn't evolve redundant hearts because they needed to survive being eaten. They evolved redundant hearts because their idea of courtship involved ritual combat. Their idea of education involved more ritual combat. And their idea of conflict music resolution was, shockingly, additional ritual combat. A ripple of what passed for laughter across music species lines. The Fornaxian squeaked something that translated as stupid music. The Caldraxian rumbled what might have been agreement or might have been digestive music. Processing. Hard to tell with their species. Now, Ven continued, this brings us to an interesting point about cultural evolution versus biological evolution. The Vrixians are part of the communion. Now, right? They've been members for 2,000 standard cycles. They've adopted peaceful conflict resolution. They've embraced diplomatic solutions. They've evolved past their aggressive origins. She paused, and something flickered across her face. That might have been amusement or might have been something else entirely. In theory, the door exploded inward. Not metaphorically. Not burst open dramatically. Actually exploded. Because apparently the Vrixian approach to door operation was the same as their approach to most things. Overwhelming force followed by questions. Like, was that excessive? Followed by the answer, probably music. Not. 3 figures filled the doorway, each standing roughly 7 feet tall, covered in segmented armor that looked like someone had given medieval plate. Mail a firmware update in anger. Management issues. Vrixian warriors in full combat array, which was like saying slightly on fire, or aggressively pointy. Every edge was a weapon. Every surface was a threat. They moved with the kind of confidence that comes from being the apex predator on a planet music full of apex predators, then deciding to take that show on the road. The lead warrior's helmet retracted music with a hiss of hydraulics, revealing a face that looked like someone had carved intimidation out of stone and given it eyes, arranged in a pattern that suggested their ancestors had needed excellent depth perception for all that ritual. Music combat, mandibles clicked as a translator chip rendered his words into common galactic. You harbor the spawn of Ambassador Vixmore. Surrender the juvenile immediately. 23 students representing 17 different music species all had the same reaction, which was to make themselves as small as physically possible while hoping that don't move and maybe they won't notice. You worked on Vrixian sensory perception the same way it worked on music predators back home. Spoiler, it didn't. Ven, meanwhile, stood absolutely still. Not frozen, not terrified, just still, like someone had hit the pause button on her specific music instance of reality. You're interrupting advanced xenobiology, she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone who'd been interrupted one too many times and was calculating whether murder was justified. Class hours are clearly posted on the station directory. The lead warrior stared at her. His companions stared at her. Somewhere in the back row. And GT, music. And GT, the Caltraxian student made a sound that translated roughly as, is she insane? And GT, music. And GT, or just human? And the answer was probably yes. Human, the warrior said, loading the word with approximately the same respect one might give to bacteria or decorative fungus. Educator caste, soft species. You do not understand the gravity of this situation. Ambassador Vixmore's heir is enrolled in this facility. There has been a challenge to his lineage. We are here to retrieve him for ritual confirmation. This is not negotiable. Ven's adaptive clothing shifted from "Are you kidding me?" blue to something that registered in the infrared, which the translation matrices helpfully interpreted as "oh, now you've done it." Crimson, a challenge to his lineage. And GT, music. And GT, she repeated each word precisely. Enunciated. So you've decided to storm in music. Active classroom. Terrified 23 students from 17 different music species. Destroy station property and interrupt. Lecture on evolutionary biology because someone said mean things about someone's genetic purity. It is ritual music, law. The warrior said, as if that explained everything. To him it probably did. Ritual law. Vin said. She looked at her students. And GT, music. And GT, still frozen in various states of terror. She looked at the Rixian warriors all. Coiled violence and cultural conviction. She looked at the holographic diagram. Music of the Rixian circulatory system. Still floating behind her. 3 redundant hearts pumping music. Imaginary blood. Class dismissed. She said quietly, music. The students didn't move. When apex predators are in the room, you don't move until someone explains that. Music rules. Class dismissed. Vin repeated, and this time there was something in her voice that made the survival-oriented portions of 17 different species brains scream. Listen to the human. Students scrambled, crawled, scuttled, and in one case teleported short distances music toward the door, giving the warriors a wide berth. The lead warrior watched them go with what? And GT, music. And GT might have been amusement. Soft species, he said again. You train children in safety. No concept of danger, no understanding of true conflict. The communion has made weakness into virtue. Ambassador the Xmor's heir will come with us, and you will. That's when Vin reached behind the lecture podium music and drew her blade. It was not a ceremonial weapon. It was not a showpiece. It was 46 cm of folded music, steel. That looked like it had opinions about comparative anatomy, and was prepared to share them music in detail. The handle was worn smooth from use, not display. The blade caught the classroom's ambient light and did something that made every warrior instinct in the room suddenly recalibrate threat assessments. Oh, Vin said. And her smile music was the kind of expression that made predators remember. They were also prey to something higher up the chain. You want to talk about ritual law? Let me tell you about human music. Ritual law. When someone threatens my students, I'm ritually obligated to educate them about their mistakes. Violently, the Rixian warriors exchanged glances. The kind of glances that translated across music species as, is this happening? And I think this is happening. And why is this happening? Human, the lead warrior said, his tone shifting from dismissive to calculating. You are educator caste. Soft species. You do not have warrior training. You do not have combat forms. You teach children basic concepts while others protect the communion. Stand aside. See, that's your first mistake, Vin said, and she shifted her weight in a way that made the blade seem less like an object she was holding and more like an extension of her arm. You've got this whole caste system thing figured out, right? Warriors fight, scholars think. Educators teach. Everyone stays in their lane. Everyone knows their place. Very organized, very civilized. Except humans don't really do the caste thing. We're sort of. Everyone does everything until something sticks. She took a step forward. The warriors tensed. Your species evolved with predators. Had to become the best hunters on your planet, developed all this ritual combat as social hierarchy. Very impressive. Very apex predator. But here's the thing about humans. And her smile music widened, showing teeth that were technically omnivore configuration, but at that moment looked remarkably carnivorous. We evolved as persistent hunters on a planet music that tried very hard to kill us. And we took that personally. We don't have redundant hearts. We don't have natural music armor. We don't have 4 eyes or enhanced sensory organs or any of that specialized evolution. What we have is spite, pattern, recognition, and the absolute audacity music, to look at something that should kill us and ask abbots, but what if we killed music at first? The lead warrior's mandibles clicked. You threaten us, music, with primitive metal. We wear armor that can withstand plasma fire. We train from spawning music in 17 combat forms. You are one soft species educator with an antique blade. Antique, Ven agreed. Also called a katana, traditional Japanese weapon, folding technique. Developed over centuries to compensate music for limited metal resources. Design focused on cutting efficiency. But sure, let's talk about your armor. She moved. What happened next? Music would be analyzed by communion combat specialists for the next 3 standard cycles. And GT, music. And GT, and would fundamentally reshape their understanding of human threat assessment. Later in official reports, music, they would use terms like unconventional, tactical application, and unanticipated kinetic efficiency. The students watching from the hallway would use music, simpler terms, primarily variations of the word that translated as holy defecation. Then closed the distance between herself and the lead warrior in a motion that was less run and more controlled fall forward, using gravity and momentum in a way that Rixian combat forms, which relied on strength and redundant musculature, simply didn't account for. Her blade caught the gap between helmet and chest plate, that tiny space that existed because armor needed to allow movement, and found something important enough that the warrior's 4 eyes went wide. She didn't kill him, didn't even seriously wound him, just introduced his redundant circulatory system to the concept of superficial bleeding, while simultaneously sweeping his legs out from under him using her own body weight as leverage. He went, and GT, music, and GT, down hard, 7 FT of armored warrior, hitting the floor with enough force to crack composite tile. His companions attacked. The second warrior came in high, expecting music, the human, to retreat, to go for distance, to use the monkey brain instinct to flee from superior force. Then went low instead, music, under his guard, blade reversed and driving up into the softer armor at the joint, then twisting, not to damage but to lock the joint, to turn his own armor into a restraint. She used his forward music, momentum, against him, redirected it, sent him stumbling past her into the holographic projector, which shattered with expensive sounding music finality. The third warrior had recalibrated threat assessment, upgraded from soft educator to unknown combatant. She activated her wrist blade, triple edge Rixian design, and came in careful, measured, using combat form 7, which emphasized defense and patience. Much better, Ven said. And GT, music. And GT, breathing hard but grinning wider. Form 7, the patient crux, very traditional, very effective. Problem is, I'm not trained to fight music. Form 7. She shifted her stance, blade angled. Differently. I'm trained to fight humans. And humans don't have forms. We have whatever music works and hit them where they're soft, and if it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid. They circled. The warrior feinted left, music. Then didn't take the bait. Feinted right. Then shifted weight but held position. The warrior's mandibles clicked in what might have been respect or might have been confusion. Her species had fought for 2,000 years. Before joining the communion, she knew combat, she knew patterns, she knew. Then threw a desk at her. Not metaphorically. Literally grabbed the nearest adjustable classroom desk, all 40 kg of adaptive furniture and ergonomic music design, and hurled it like it was a particularly aggressive frisbee. The warrior dodged. Because of course she dodged, she was trained in 17 combat forms and none of them involved furniture-based projectiles. And that's when Ven closed distance. Again, blade finding the weak point at the knee. Joint cutting deep enough music to make the warrior's leg buckle. 3 warriors down. Time elapsed. Approximately music, 45 seconds. The communion record for a single combatant defeating 3 armored Brixian warriors was held by Caldraxian music, champion, and stood at 38 seconds. Ven had missed the record music while using what amounted to an antique knife and improvised tactics. She stood over them, breathing hard. Blade still ready. Anyone music else want to discuss? Ritual law. The lead warrior bleeding from a superficial wound but mostly just shocked stared up at her. You are educator music cast. This is not possible. There's your second mistake. Ven said, lowering her blade music but not sheathing it. Humans don't have an educator cast. We have educators music who used to be other things. You want to know what I used to be? Before I took music, this job teaching xenobiology to students who can't agree on what constitutes a proper respiratory system. She walked to her desk, pulled out a data slate and tossed it to him. He caught it with one hand, mandibles clicking as he read. Lieutenant Commander Ven Harrow, she said, her voice losing some of the manic energy and settling into something colder. Terran Coalition Music, Marines. 4th Special Operations Group. Served 8 years, music including 2 tour in the border conflicts, 3 deep space boarding actions, and 1 incident classified under so many levels of secrecy that acknowledging it exists technically violates 4 treaties. I didn't retire because I aged out or got injured. I retired because I was tired of explaining to people why violence was necessary. Thought maybe I'd try explaining to the next generation why understanding each other might prevent the violence in the first place. She sheathed the blade. The movement so smooth, it suggested music, muscle memory measured in years. Turns out some lessons require both approaches. The students were still in the hallway, watching through the destroyed doorway. The Caldraxian was making a sound that translated as, I will never complain about homework. Music again. The Mintharian's crystalline structure was refracting light in patterns that suggested profound music. Respect or possibly fear or possibly both. Now, Ven said, walking back to the front of the destroyed classroom, stepping over groaning warriors and music, broken furniture. About Ambassador the Xmor's heir. Would that be you, Korvax? A small voice from the hallway, barely audible through the translation matrix. Yes, Professor. Come here, please. A juvenile Brixian, music. Maybe 3 ft tall, all gangly limbs and oversized eyes, crept back into the classroom. Music. He looked at the defeated warriors. Looked at his professor. Looked at the blade still in her hand. They say there's a challenge to my lineage, he said quietly. They say I need to prove my heritage through ritual combat. I'm only 12 standard cycles old. I don't know combat forms, I only know biology and mathematics and the quantum mechanics you've been teaching us. Ven knelt down, which put her at eye level with the juvenile. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to contact music, your father, he's going to contact his people. They're going to explain that ritual law operates through designated champions, and that while they're very welcome to challenge your music lineage, any combat will be conducted through proper channels with proper oversight, and definitely not by bursting into educational facilities and terrifying music students. Does that sound reasonable? Korvax nodded frantically. Good. Ven stood up, looked at the warriors. You three, station security is probably on their way. You're going to explain that this was a cultural misunderstanding, that you will absolutely pay for the destroyed door and holographic projector and damaged furniture, and that you've learned a valuable lesson about the difference between soft species and species that chooses not to be hard until you give them a reason. Clear? The lead warrior still on the floor. Manible's music clicking in what was definitely respect this time. Clear, Commander Harrow. It's Professor Harrow now. I gave up the rank when I gave up the obligation to solve problems with music violence. But I kept the skills, because humans don't really separate who we are from what we were. We're cumulative music creatures. We stack experiences like building blocks and hope the structure holds. She looked at her students still, watching from the hallway, which is why I teach xenobiology. Music. Because if you understand how species evolved, you understand why they think the way music they think. And if you understand why they think the way they think, maybe you can solve problems music without anyone getting hurt. She paused, looked at the groaning warriors. Usually, station security arrived approximately music 90 seconds later, which was impressive response time, considering the station housed 50,000 music souls from 100 different species. They were led by a Tellurian commander, all tentacles music and professional disappointment, who took one look at the scene and made a sound that the translation matrix rendered as, I'm too old for this nonsense. Professor Harrow, the commander music said, tentacles writhing in what was either agitation or just how Tellurians stood. Hard to tell. Would you care to explain why there are 3 Brixian warriors music on your classroom floor? Cultural exchange program. Ven said brightly. We were discussing the practical music applications of evolutionary biology. They volunteered to help demonstrate music why redundant organ systems are both an advantage and a potential liability in combat scenarios. Very educational. The students learned a lot. The commander's tentacles did something complicated, and the destroyed door Enthusiastic entry. You know how warrior species are. All that pent-up energy. And your blade. Visual aid. Can't teach a proper xenobiology class without examples of species-specific weaponry and cultural artifacts. The commander stared at her for a long moment. You are the most dangerous educator in this entire facility. And I include the archive mind that music accidentally deleted 3 students' consciousnesses last cycle during a particularly enthusiastic lecture on quantum memory. They restored those students. Vin pointed out. Mostly. The commander turned to the warriors. You 3. Medical bay, then my office, music. Then probably a very uncomfortable conversation with your superiors about music, why you thought attacking a human educator was tactically sound. I don't know what intelligence briefings music you've been reading, but they clearly skipped the section labeled humans are nice until they're not. And GT, music. And GT, and then they're very much not. The warriors limped out, assisted by music security drones. Korvac stood next to Vin, still processing music, what he'd witnessed. The other students slowly filtered back into the destroyed classroom, crunching over broken holographic projector components and displaced furniture. So, Vin said, brushing debris off her desk and pulling up a new holographic display, music from a backup projector. Where were we? Ah, yes. Brixian circulatory systems, 3. Redundant hearts. As we've just demonstrated in practical terms, redundancy is excellent for surviving damage but doesn't actually prevent the damage from happening in the first place. The evolutionary music advantage is recovery, not prevention. This is important because Professor Thementherian music interrupted her crystalline voice, chiming with confusion. You just defeated 3 armed warriors in single combat with a blade in 45 seconds. And now you're returning to the lecture. Vin looked at her, genuine confusion on her face. Class isn't over. We've still got 30 minutes left. Did you think we just waste educational time because of a minor interruption? Minor interruption, music. The Caldraxian rumbled. She calls ritual combat a minor interruption. It was either that or reschedule. And we're already behind on the syllabus. The Communion Educational Standards Board is very particular about completion percentages. She pulled up a new diagram, this one, showing human musculature. Now let's compare music. Humans don't have redundant hearts, don't have enhanced musculature, don't have natural armor or weapons. Music, what we have is efficient oxygen, transport, excellent endurance, metabolism, and a skeletal structure that's decent at absorbing impact. Not impressive compared music to dedicated warrior species. But here's the thing. She zoomed in on the human hand, highlighting bone structure, music, and tendon arrangement. We have precision manipulation, opposable thumbs, music, fine motor control that lets us do everything from brain surgery to crafting incredibly, music, efficient cutting tools. We didn't evolve to be the strongest or fastest, music, or most armored. We evolved to be the best at figuring out how to kill things better than they could kill us, and then teaching that information to the music next generation. The classroom was silent. not the terrified music silence from before, the thoughtful silence of students, realizing their professor had just taught them more about evolutionary biology through practical demonstration, music, than 6 lectures of theory had managed. Every species then continued, evolve solutions to their environment. Music pressures. Vrixians evolved redundancy and strength. Because music, their planet had large predators and valued ritual combat. Humans evolved endurance and tool use. Because our planet had everything from apex predators to microscopic parasites trying to kill us, and we survived by being too music, stubborn to die and too creative to fight fair. Neither approach is better. They're just different solutions to different problems. She looked at Korvax. Your father's people value combat, prowess because their history shaped them that way. My people value adaptability because our history shaped us that way. Understanding music that. Understanding why species are the way they are. That's how you build a real communion. Not by everyone becoming the same, but by everyone understanding the different. Korvax's mandibles clicked softly. Will they come back? The challengers to my lineage? Probably. But next time they'll use proper channels and designated champions and all the bureaucratic frameworks music. The communion has spent 12,000 years developing, which means you'll have time to prepare. And more importantly, time to finish my class. Because I guarantee understanding xenobiology will be more useful in the long run than knowing combat forms. The Pharnaxian squeaked music, something that translated as, "Can you teach us to fight like that?" No. Ven said firmly, music. I can teach you to understand why species fight the way they fight. Which is more valuable, music. I'm an educator, not a combat instructor. I left that career specifically so I wouldn't have music to train people to hurt other people. What happened today was an exception. Music, not a teaching moment I want to repeat. But you were amazing. Thementherian chimed. I was effective. There's a difference. Amazing is what happens when you discover a new quantum principle, or compose a symphony that works across 17 different auditory ranges, or figure out how to cure a species-specific disease. What I did today was, she paused, choosing words carefully, necessary, but not amazing. Never confuse necessity with virtue. She turned back to the holographic display. Now, human skeletal structure. Notice the upright posture, the freed forelimbs, the vulnerable spine. Everything about human anatomy screams. This should not work as a survival strategy. And yet here we are, teaching classes on space stations and participating in galactic communion and generally refusing to acknowledge that we're technically the weird ones. Questions. 23 hands, paws, tentacles, and crystalline protrusions. Music raised. Vin smiled, and it was a different smile from the one she'd worn while fighting. Gentler, more genuine. Yes, Korvax. Professor, if humans are so good at persistence and adaptation, music, why did you become a teacher instead of staying in the military? You were clearly good at it. Vin was quiet for a moment. Because being good at something and wanting to do something aren't the same thing. I was good at music, violence, effective at it, could calculate kill zones and threat assessments and tactical music, applications like other people calculate, math problems, but every time I had to use those skills, every time I had to hurt someone, and GT, music, and GT, even in defense, even when necessary. It took something from me, little pieces, and I realized I was spending my life taking things from myself and from others. She gestured music at the classroom, at the students. Teaching gives things instead. Every time one of you understands a concept, every time music, you make a connection between ideas, every time you ask a question that I have to really think about to music, answer. It adds something to you, to me, to the collective music pool of knowledge we're all swimming in. I'd rather spend my life adding than subtracting. But you kept your blade, the Caldraxian observed, and your skills. Because sometimes, Vin said quietly, the universe requires subtraction too. Protect the addition. I'd prefer to live in a universe where that wasn't true. But I'm adaptable enough music to accept the universe as it is while working toward the universe as it should. Music B. The lesson continued. Students took music notes on human anatomy, on comparative evolutionary strategies, on the philosophical implications of biological determinism versus cultural flexibility. Outside, station maintenance crews were already working on the destroyed door, grumbling about warrior species and their property damage. In his office, Ambassador Lixmore was receiving a very uncomfortable call from station security about his people's music tactical choices. In the medical bay, 3 warriors were having their wounds treated while simultaneously having their tactical assumptions fundamentally restructured. And in classroom 7 beta, Professor Vin Harrow taught xenobiology to students who now understood that every species was dangerous in its own way. That soft didn't mean weak, that teacher didn't mean harmless, and that humans were possibly the most music terrifying creatures in the communion, specifically because they'd figured out how to be terrifying while being nice about it. The class ended on time. Students filed out, still processing what they'd witnessed. Korvax lingered, mandibles clicking nervously. Thank you, Professor, for protecting me. Ven looked at him, expression softening. That's the job, Korvax. Not the teaching job. The being an adult around children job. Every species in the communion has that. Understanding music. Even if we express it differently. You protect the next generation so they can grow up to protect the generation after them. It's the one universal constant. Even for warrior species, music. Especially for warrior species. Why do you think your people have all those ritual combat traditions? They're not about music, violence for violence's sake. They're about controlled violence, tested violence, violence with rules and structure and outcomes that don't end in extinction. Your people figured out music how to channel aggression into survival. That's sophisticated, not primitive. Korvax's eyes brightened. I never thought of it that way. That's what education is for. Taking what you know and showing you how it connects to what you don't know yet. Now go on. I've got papers to grade music and a strongly worded letter to write to maintenance about response times for classroom repairs. After he left, then sat at music, her desk surrounded by broken furniture and scattered papers, and the lingering smell of adrenaline and fear. She pulled out her grade book, started marking assignments, biology exam scores, mostly passing, a few exceptional. One student who clearly hadn't studied and thought they music could wing it, based on intuition alone. Her blade sat on the desk still, sheathed now, blade oil carefully applied to prevent rust, an antique from Earth, carried through how many conflicts, present for how many decisions that took pieces away, now sitting next to exam papers and lesson plans and the mundane debris of education. The door chimed. The Tellurian security commander flowed in, tentacles arranged in what might music have been resignation. I filed the official report. The commander said, 3 Vrixian warriors claimed they were defeated by an educator in single combat. I've marked it as probable exaggeration, due to cultural embarrassment, because the alternative is admitting that one of my educators is more dangerous than most music of my security force, which raises questions I don't want to answer. Appreciated, then said, not looking up from music grading. Off the record, Professor Harrow, how many people music have you killed? Then was quiet for a long moment. Enough to know I don't want to add to the number. Enough to know that teaching music 17-year-old aliens about evolutionary biology is infinitely more valuable than anything I did in the service. Enough to know that music, every single one of them took something from the universe that can't be replaced. And the only way I can balance that equation is by adding as much as I possibly can before music I'm done. The commander's tentacles rippled. The Communion Educational Standards Board is going to want a full report on today's incident. They'll probably have questions about your teaching methods. My teaching methods are unorthodox. Music but effective. Student retention rates are above average. Test scores exceed music baseline. And as of today, every student in this class has a practical music memorable understanding of comparative evolutionary biology that they'll carry for the rest of their lives. She finally looked up, meeting the commander's eye clusters. Sometimes the best lessons are the ones that don't fit neatly into approved curricula. I'm not arguing. I'm just noting that you're possibly the most dangerous educator in communion space, and we're paying you to teach children. The irony is not lost on me. The irony, then said, is that dangerous and educator shouldn't be contradictory terms. But the communion has spent 12,000 years assuming they are. Humans are just reminding everyone. And GT, music. And GT, that the people who teach you are often the same people who survived long enough to have something music worth teaching. After the commander left, then continued grading papers. Outside the station hummed with life. 50,000 souls from 100 species, all trying to figure out how to live together, learn together, build something better together. It was messy, it was complicated, it was full of cultural misunderstandings, music and biological incompatibilities, and moments where ritual law crashed into educational protocols, and somebody had music to explain, preferably with visual aids. That different didn't mean wrong, but it was also beautiful. It was also hopeful. It was also the kind of thing worth protecting, worth teaching, worth fighting for music when necessary. Then reached the last paper, an essay on cross-species medical ethics. By Music, the Mentherian Student. Thoughtful, well-researched, a bit meandering in the middle sections. Music, but strong conclusions. She marked it with approval music and a note about tightening argumentative structure. Then she picked up her blade, locked it in the secure drawer where it would stay until needed again, and pulled up next week's lesson plan. Advanced Xenobiology, Comparative Neural Structures and their Cultural Implications. No explosions expected, but with humans in the communion, one could never be entirely sure.